Hey everyone! Hopefully we have audio today. Let's start slow and make sure that you can hear us before we move on to anything else. Uh,
We have a confirmation that audio is working.
we have audio, amazing. We have changed nothing, so it's probably not our fault that didn't work yesterday. Let's blame someone else. That's always a good idea. Uh, Super happy to see some of the same faces back. A lot of nice comments on YouTube. Love to see it. But let's kick off. We have a busy live stream today because we're doing a 2-for-1. So we're doing yesterday's stream and today's planned stream all in one go. So let's get going. If you haven't heard us talk before, which wouldn't be surprising given our audio troubles. This is us. I'm Marcus. I'm co-founder of Encore, together with Andre. And we're now on Wednesday of our launch week, so day 3. We're going to do this stream again tomorrow and again on Friday, same time. So I hope to see you then. But before we get into the new content, let's just recap what we've already done. So on Monday, we launched custom middleware for Encore TypeScript, which was super highly requested, even though Encore has a lot of sort of middleware functionality built in for auth and things like that. People want to be able to do their own custom reusable middleware, which is great. So we've added that functionality. Frederick was on the stream talking about it. You can find all the information and the recording of that stream on the Launch Week website, so encore.dev/launchweek. And then day 2, quite a silent stream, but let's take a look at what we launched yesterday and talk about that. So public bucket, let's go.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago now, we launched object storage support for Encore, both on TypeScript and Go. And this was one of the most highly requested features for probably a couple of years. And we knew that we wanted to do a quick follow and just gradually expand on the object storage capabilities. And so yesterday we announced the second sort of the most highly requested follow-up feature, which is the ability to define public buckets. And what do we mean by that? Well, object storage is really for storing unstructured data, so things like images or audio or video or stuff like that, where you're not really storing things in a database, and it's extremely scalable. It's really easy to use, but oftentimes when you are uploading an image, it's because you then want to show it to the user at some other point, right? And for those sort of use cases, it's really useful to be able to define what we call a public bucket. And so what you see here is sort of the baseline configuration where you just define profile pictures bucket. This is private by default. And so how do we make it public? Well, like everything in Encore, we try to make it really simple. So just one line of code, you say, I want this bucket to be public, and Encore takes care of the rest. As with everything in Encore, we try to make it work across all clouds and across all environments. So once you have defined a public bucket, it's just a one-liner to retrieve the public URL for an object that you have stored in the bucket. And then you can just take that URL and present it to users or return it in APIs or whatever it might be. And this works across, all environments. It works local development. It works in all clouds. It works in Encore Cloud. It works in preview environments. It's really, the whole suite of tools that you've come to really love from Encore. So this is already super useful. And if you're self-hosting Encore, this works perfectly fine. All you have to do is you have to define the sort of base URL where the public bucket is accessible. And this depends a little bit on what provider you're using. If you're using Cloudflare R2, for example, which is coming up shortly, then you get it from Cloudflare. If you're using S3, then you get it from S3. If you're using Google Cloud Storage, you get it from them. And they all have really easy to follow instructions on, like, this is the base URL for the public bucket. So just literally one extra line of code in your configuration. And Encore takes care of the rest. Next up, if you're not doing self-hosting and you're using Encore Cloud for deploying to your cloud of choice, then Encore Cloud now automatically also sets up a CDN whenever you're using a public bucket. And so it's not just making the bucket public, it's also setting up a CDN in front of it and serving the contents of the bucket from the CDN. Now, this is really useful if you have sort of very large content, or you have a lot of traffic from different parts of the world. You'll get automatically distributed across the world, and you get lower bandwidth costs and so on. This works automatically in all the environments that Encore supports. So GCP, AWS, Encore cloud hosting, and additionally, we are also announcing that Encore Cloud now supports provisioning buckets with Cloudflare R2. And this means that whatever cloud you're using, whether using AWS or GCP, you can now choose to use Cloudflare for all object storage buckets. And that means that the CDN support will also be backed by Cloudflare in that case. So this is really powerful. Cloudflare's R2 is really great, particularly if you're already a Cloudflare customer. They typically have lower bandwidth costs than S3 and Google Cloud Storage. There are some minor differences, like one thing to keep in mind is they don't yet have support for version buckets, for example. So it's typically the best choice if you're doing a public bucket and you're already using Cloudflare. It's really easy to set up in that case. And Encore Cloud also has support for mixing and matching different providers for different buckets, but that's a bit more of an advanced use case. Yeah.
Cool. Should we do a live demo?
Let's do a live demo.
Are you prepared? Let's see.
I am prepared.
Here we go.
All right. So if you are seeing my screen.
Even before you start, we have a question if it works both for Go and TypeScript.
Yes, of course. Everything we are announcing today, 100% feature parity on both Encore Go and Encore TypeScript. It works the same in both. The APIs are very similar. In the slides you just saw, we showed how it looks on Encore Go. And so I figured for the live demo, we'll do TypeScript so that you get a flavor for both. But the APIs are basically identical, so no big surprises there. Cool. So what we are seeing here is Encore TS. This is how you define a public bucket. You call a new bucket, you pass in public true, and once you do that, you can start to use this method for getting the public URL for any object. So this is a really simple API. It accepts some text, and then it stores that text. It generates a random UUID as the sort of object name, and then it uploads that, and then we return the public URL for this object. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So with everything, Encore run, we'll spin it all up. We have the local development dashboard. So let's use that. And let's say, hello, Encore, Encore community, and call that. And as you can see here, because this is running on my computer, the public URL that we get back is actually on localhost. And so we can take this and we can open it up and we get back the contents of what we just uploaded. This also works in tests, for example, and this content is actually stored on disk, which means that it's persisted across runs, for example. When you're running in tests, all of the contents are stored in memory, so they don't, they don't persist between test runs, as you would expect. And that's really it. Another thing, because Encore does static analysis, if we change this to public false, you get a compile time error saying you can't actually use the public URL method on a private bucket because it's not really defined what that means. And so this is like an additional layer of safety that you can't really incorrectly use this. You have to make the bucket public, and then it all works. And so we can take this and we can also deploy this to the cloud. And for that, I wanted to do something a little bit fancier. So here, just to demonstrate how easy it is to use Encore with together with other tools, this is another API which is actually, it takes in a prompt, and then we have an OpenAI API key. We instantiate the OpenAI SDK, and then we take the prompt. We say that is the prompt from the user. We get back a completion, and then we upload the first sort of, if sometimes you can get back multiple choices, but we just take the first choice, we upload that, and we return a public URL to the uploaded object. So now, instead of just taking content from the user, we're using that as a prompt, we're feeding that to OpenAI, and then we're uploading the response from OpenAI to the public bucket. So for that, let's actually I'm going to create a new commit so that we trigger a deployment. And we head over to Encore Cloud's CI and CD system, where this will then do a build, and then it will provision the infrastructure. I did this just a couple minutes ago, but I'm just demonstrating the workflow for those who aren't familiar. And then once this is uploaded, it will be, we'll have this prompt that we can call from the service catalog. So now we're just waiting for the release to deploy, and then we'll be good to go.
So in the meantime, we have a question from Simon asking how Encore's tracing works together with using public buckets.
Yeah, so great question. As with everything else, Encore's object storage is fully traced if you're uploading, if you're downloading, and so on. One thing that is important to know is when you're generating a public bucket URL, that is not an operation that is traced, and that's because it doesn't require any API calls or anything like that. It's really an in-memory operation, which also means you can see that here. This is not an asynchronous method. You don't have to await the public URL to be computed. It's just purely in memory. It's generating it based on the configuration it has and returning it. So for that reason, this takes just, a microsecond or something like that, if not less. And so it doesn't really need tracing. It's purely in memory. So you will not see a tracing for generating a public URL, but anything that requires sort of an API call will be traced. All right. So now we have this prompt endpoint, and we can actually let's do this from the terminal just so we can see. So, oops. And here we're gonna say generate a random joke. And here we get back a URL to the object. And you can see here that since this is Encore Cloud, the URL is encorestatic.com. If you're using Google Cloud or AWS, it will look differently. And now we can call this. And there is our joke.
Yeah, random indeed. I wonder how it interpreted the prompt. Random. Stefan asks, by the way, if you can test public URLs when you're developing locally.
Yeah, so that's what we just saw here. You can absolutely do that. There's full support for public URLs, public buckets, and public URLs everywhere. So go nuts. Test it anywhere and everywhere that Encore is running.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's it. That's Encore's public bucket. Now live for use everywhere.
Excellent. Now let's get back and talk about today's launch. But if you have any more questions on public buckets, you can post them in the chat, and we'll get back to them at the end, and we can answer them before we end the stream. So day 3, which is where we actually are at today, halfway through the launch week, glass half full or empty, I don't know. What we're announcing is part of it is Encore Cloud, which is sort of a rebrand of the cloud platform, but it's also our sort of continued investment in the open source project that is Encore. And what we're announcing today is the sort of separation of the two. So we're making Encore's open source project fully independent in lots of new ways, which we think is going to help people understand what it is and how they can use it. And you might ask, isn't Encore already open source? Well, yes. So already we have open sourced basically everything. So the framework, the documentation, the CLI, the parser, the compiler, the runtime, generating Docker images for your app. The only small asterisk is the local dev dash, which relies on some components of the Encore Cloud platform still. We're working through separating those. So that is definitely our ambition, that all of the local dash will be fully independent as well, but it's taking some time as they are slightly coupled today. So all of this is open source. So you get everything you need to develop your application as well as deploy it, all without using any sort of proprietary or Encore sort of owned properties. And then what is Encore Cloud then? Well, it's basically our managed service for those who do not want to configure their own cloud infrastructure and do not want to manage their own deployments and DevOps. So it's basically providing CI/CD, free hosting for development, the cloud versions of all the local tools built into Encore, so the service catalog and tracing for your cloud environments. It's secrets management, it's preview environments for every pull request you make. It's automating setting up your infrastructure in your own cloud on AWS and GCP. It's managing IAM for you, and it's if you're using custom domains via Encore, you get sort of a web application firewall as well, powered by Cloudflare. So basically everything you need to go from running locally to deployed securely and scalable in your own cloud. And how we're continuing sort of our open source journey today and decoupling the open source project from sort of the Encore Cloud services, we've launched 2 new websites. So giving Encore, the open source project, its own website. So encore.dev is now fully about the open source project. Everything on there is talking about the framework, and that's sort of given us a lot more room and real estate to do a better job explaining it, and we're going to continue that process. And at the same time, Encore Cloud, encore.cloud is the URL, has its own website, and we can do a better job explaining that as well without sort of mixing in what the open source part is and what the cloud part is. And next, we've completely revamped the docs as well to make it a lot simpler to find what you're looking for. So before, everything was sort of in one big hierarchy of documentation. Now we've broken it out, so you have one set of docs for Encore TS, one for Encore Go, and then a separate section entirely for what is Encore Cloud. So if you're using Encore TS and you're self-hosting and you're only using the open source version, you now only need to keep track of sort of what's in this tab, which is on screen, making it a lot easier to find what you're looking for and clearer sort of what's what. And then finally, we've spent a lot of effort in the team to create much more detailed documentation for how you would configure your infrastructure when you're self-hosting. This is now a lot more in depth than it has been before. And that's not to say we're done. We're going to continue investing in this, adding more examples. Someone asked earlier today here on YouTube for an example for how to sort of deploy it to AWS. We're going to add sort of a step-by-step guide for that. But in the meantime, I recommend checking out the DigitalOcean tutorial that we already have. It should give you a lot of information. You can sort of just exchange the steps for the AWS equivalent. So already we've published basically everything you need to get your app up and running in whatever sort of cloud you want to use. And people are already appreciating it. And what we need is sort of your feedback, obviously. That helps us make this a lot better and more useful. But also, as we talked about, the documentation is open source. It's all in the main project, the Encore repo, basically. So you can go in and you can sort of contribute guides, and you can contribute some clarifications as you sort of run into things that we maybe haven't thought of or tested ourselves. So together we can sort of make this a really comprehensive and useful set of docs for anyone who wants to do this. And that's basically it for the day 3 launch. So we can spend a couple minutes answering questions both on that, but also public buckets or anything else Encore related. And Simon starts off by asking a really useful question. How can the community contribute to the open source project? So what I just said, docs and guides and examples is super useful. Another thing that's maybe not as obvious to people is to sort of spread the word and talk about it. The more people use it, the more people support the project visually. Both it sort of gives us much more feedback and sort of surface area to get feedback from other people. So it helps us make Encore better. Also helps us get more resources to invest more in making it better. So blogging or talking or tweeting is also incredibly valuable and helpful for the project as a whole. But then if you want to contribute more hands-on in the development, Andre, maybe you can say a few words about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of things. It's everything from giving us feedback on what what features are missing, if there's something that you would like to see. It is bug reports are always helpful. Uh, Positive feedback is great. Like, oh, I think this is really valuable. This is something that was really difficult for me, and Encore makes that easier. Uh, and then, of course, it's implementing new functionality, and there's a whole lot of that. It's everything from, new pub sub providers, like we'd like to support Kafka. There is adding new functionality, like the public bucket support that we just showed. It's adding additional configuration options to the CLI. A lot of these things, it's all open source, and it does require a little bit of, it's a big project, so it does require some, getting acquainted with the code base. But we have instructions on GitHub, and if something is not clear how to achieve something, we are super happy to help, either on Discord or on GitHub, just to sort of help point you in the right direction. And the only thing I would ask is if you're keen on like helping us build out more of like a feature or a larger thing, to open a discussion first, and we can sort of agree on the design and how it should look, before like starting to build it. That tends to be much more effective, so that we're aligned on what it should look like. But yeah, please help out. Any of these things we talked about are extremely valuable. So whatever makes the most sense for you, for your experience, for how much time you have, and it's all really appreciated.
Great. And another question from YouTube: how are we funding Encore, and how can we make sure it's going to stay maintained if they decide to use it in production? Well, to date, right now, it's funded by Encore, the company, and we have venture investors basically, and they're all listed on the website. They're basically investors who focus almost exclusively on dev tools and this type of product. So they're very supportive, and they have a really good understanding of the open source community and what it means to maintain an open source project. And they've been very supportive. And at this point in time, we're extremely well funded and have sort of years of runway to have a core team dedicated full time to maintaining the project. Beyond that, we have a lot of users now, and a lot of companies who are relying on Encore already. And if for some reason we would need to set up some other type of funding source to maintain the open source project, there's by now quite a large group to help support that, who are very dedicated to the project itself. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, the other is, Encore Cloud is that's our commercial,
Of course.
product, and we charge for that. And so we have a lot of companies using that. And so we're using obviously that as a way to ensure the open source project stays well funded. And the other thing is, I think, because the framework and like what we talked about in today's presentation is really about making sure that the open source framework stands on its own and is super useful without the Encore Cloud platform. It also means that there's very little risk, because if you're only interested in using the open source framework, well, it's an open source framework. It's completely open source. It's not going to break if something happens to Encore Cloud. We have much more resources to invest in the framework than your typical framework. So that's why you're seeing quite rapid progress compared to, frameworks, whether it's Express or Fastify or whatever, where there isn't as much ability to really develop it as we can provide because of Encore Cloud.
So a related question from Simon, is there a way to migrate between the open source version and Encore Cloud? I guess in any direction is interesting.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people is, yeah, thanks for that. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, you can migrate in both ways. When it comes to a lot of people, when they're uh, trying out Encore, it is really important that the open source version is standalone. So a lot of people start there and they set everything up, they deploy themselves, they make sure it works, and then uh, either shortly after that or some point in the future they decide like, okay, um, this is working really well for us. Can we start using Encore Cloud? And then the answer is, of course. You can, with Encore Cloud, you can integrate with your existing infrastructure, and you can just have Encore Cloud take over more of the deployment and infrastructure automation process. Um, you can also start using it for building new things, and so on. And so that's like a very common path is like start with open source, and once you're sort of happy and confident that it's working, then you can look at moving and using Encore Cloud more. Uh, Another way is like if you are confident that like actually I just want to move as quickly as possible. I want to get started with Encore Cloud right away. Um, then by all means do that. You can either start on the free tier or you can upgrade to Encore Pro. But um, it's really easy to move to the open source version at any point in time because all of the infrastructure that Encore sets up is inside of your own cloud. And that means that at any point you can just stop using Encore Cloud and use the open source version. And all you have to do is follow the open source documentation to sort of configure the open source release of Encore to what we call the infrastructure config to use the infrastructure that has been provisioned into your own cloud account. So both ways are really quite straightforward. We're happy to help anyone move in either direction, whether it's to move away from Encore Cloud or move to Encore Cloud. We're happy to help. We take this incredibly seriously, and it shouldn't require any downtime at all on your side, really.
Excellent. And Mohammed commenting that it's a good move to separate the cloud and framework. Well, we're glad that you think so. Now we've done it, no going back. So that's very good. We can make time for one or two final questions before we wrap up. We're gonna give you a minute. I know there's a little bit of a delay between sort of us in the studio and what's happening on YouTube, so we'll make up some things to say in the meantime and see if any questions come in through the chat. Otherwise, we'll be back here tomorrow at the same time talking about another brand new launch. Andre, is there any teaser we want to give there, or is it kept under wraps?
It's kept under wraps, I want to say, but we've already seen some excited people who are sort of sniffing around because it's all open source. You can, of course, find some hints here and there if you're just looking at the open source releases and pull requests. We obviously, when we're doing these releases, we have to make preparations ahead of time. So yeah, if you're super curious, you can always go digging around in the open source project, get some sneak peeks.
Good advice. Final question then. Frederick's asking about buckets. What's the best practice for handling versioning of assets?
Yeah, great question. So in all of the, maybe I will share my screen.
Oh, another live demo.
Yeah, so when it comes to uploading, this is the same example as before. Let's use this one. So by default, buckets are not versioned, but you can say versioned true. And what will happen then is this upload will return this object attributes. And if you look at that, it has a version. And this is a string which has like the object version. And you can use this for basically all other endpoints, like bucket download. You can optionally specify the version to download. So here you can say like object.version, and this will download that specific version. You can also, if you want to make sure that an object, this will overwrite any existing object that has the same ID, and then it will generate a new version. But you can also specify preconditions, not exists true, and this will ensure that this object can only be uploaded if there isn't already a version. Of course, this does not require version true. This works even without. But most of these APIs, they take the version number as an input to them, and you can use that to operate on specific versions. When it comes to the public URL, that's always serving the latest version. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, object versioning can be super useful for a lot of things, especially when you want people, like, let's say you have you're uploading a video, and maybe you're doing tweaks, and you want to be able to go back and look at a previous version of the video, or same thing with images or whatever. Yeah, you can easily do that. There's also more things we plan on supporting in the future. Like you can have life cycle rules where you can say, okay, any version that's older than 14 days, automatically delete that, and things like that. That's not part of today's release, but it's something we plan on doing in the future.
Very cool. All right. So with that, let's wrap up for today. We're going to be back tomorrow, same time, same channel, our YouTube channel, that is. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Always fun to see your questions and comments, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.